I heard crying coming from deep in the woods behind my house. But when I called out, the crying stopped, and something else answered. It had been a quiet night, as usual. My house is tucked away at the edge of town, the last one on a long winding road that most people avoid. There's a dense forest that stretches for miles behind my property, a dark expanse that swallows all sound. Growing up, I'd heard the stories, the warnings, really. People had gone missing in those woods, kids who wandered too far, hikers who strayed off the beaten path, even adults who knew better. They were never found, but after living here for years, I had learned to tune it out, push those tales to the back of my mind. Nothing ever happened around here, just me, the trees, and the quiet, until that night. I was sitting on the porch, the cool evening air brushing against my skin, a cup of coffee in hand. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m., and the woods were as still as ever. The sky was clear, the stars bright overhead, and for a moment I just listened to the gentle hum of crickets. The world felt peaceful. Then I heard it. At first, I thought I was imagining things. It was faint, barely audible. A soft whimper, like the sound of a child crying far off in the distance. I frowned, lowering my cup and listening more intently. There it was again, this time clearer. A small, heart-wrenching sob carried on the breeze from somewhere deep in the woods. I stood, my stomach twisting. There shouldn't be anyone out there, not at this hour, and especially not a child. The forest was no place for anyone to wander at night, let alone a kid. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cutting through the stillness. The crying didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, more desperate. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight from inside and headed toward the edge of the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the thick undergrowth and twisting branches. As I stepped closer to the woods, the crying became clearer, sharp. Broken sobs, like a child in pain. My heart raced. Someone needed help. I paused at the tree line, the sensible part of me screaming to stop. I knew the stories. I knew what happened to people who went into these woods at night. But that crying, God, it sounded so helpless. I couldn't just leave them out there. "I'm coming," I called, stepping into the forest. The air was cooler beneath the canopy, the trees towering above me, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. The flashlight's beam swept over the moss-covered ground, casting eerie shadows on the trunks. The crying was still ahead, farther in. I quickened my pace, trying to pinpoint its location, the sound pulling me deeper and deeper into the woods. But as I walked, something strange began to happen. The farther I went, the quieter the forest became. The usual sounds of the night, crickets, rustling leaves, distant owls, faded away, replaced by an oppressive, unnatural silence. The only thing I could hear was the soft crunch of my footsteps and the crying, which grew louder with each step I took. I should have turned back. Every instinct in my body told me to stop, to go home, and forget about it. But I couldn't shake the image of a lost, scared child, alone in these woods, crying out for help. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches twisting together overhead, forming a thick, suffocating canopy that blocked out the moonlight. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, panic seized me. I slapped the side of it, and the light steadied, casting long, distorted shadows on the ground. I stopped, scanning the woods around me. The crying was closer now, so close I could almost feel it. But something about it wasn't right. It was too steady, too rhythmic, like a recording on a loop. The same sobbing over and over again, without change. My skin prickled, and I swallowed the rising fear in my throat. "Hello?" I called out again. "Are you hurt? Where are you?" The crying stopped. Just like that, cut off mid-sob, leaving the forest in complete silence. My heart pounded in my chest, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I swept the flashlight beam around, but there was nothing, no sign of anyone. "Hello?" I called again, my voice shaky. "Are you there?" No response. Then from behind me, a voice, low, gravelly, and not at all human, whispered my name. I froze, my blood running cold. The voice was soft, almost a growl, but it was unmistakable. It had said my name. How did it know my name? Slowly I turned, the flashlight trembling in my hand. I shone it into the trees behind me, but there was nothing, just darkness and shadows. My breathing quickened, my pulse racing in my ears. "Who's there?" I demanded, though my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like something was watching me from the shadows just out of sight. The trees creaked in the wind, but the air was still, too still. And then I heard it again, the crying. But this time, it wasn't ahead of me. It was behind me. I whipped around, my flashlight cutting through the trees, but again, there was nothing, just the empty, silent woods. The crying continued, faint and distant, but somehow closer than before, circling me, as if it were coming from all directions at once. My breath hitched and I took a step back, my foot crunching on the dead leaves beneath me. Something was wrong. The crying. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was luring me, drawing me deeper into the woods. Suddenly a branch snapped to my left. I spun, heart hammering, but again, nothing. Just darkness. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my palms slick with sweat. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like they were rooted to the spot. And then, in the beam of my flashlight, I saw it. A figure. It stood just beyond the trees, half hidden in the shadows, tall and thin, its body unnaturally elongated, its limbs too long, too thin. Its skin was pale, almost translucent. And its eyes, God, its eyes were the worst part. They were black, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light, unblinking, staring straight at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, frozen, as the thing took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The crying had stopped. Now there was only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the soft crunch of leaves as the thing moved closer. And then it spoke. In that same low, guttural voice, it whispered my name again, dragging it out, savoring the sound of it. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The flashlight flickered, and for a split second, the figure disappeared. When the light came back on, it was closer, much closer. Its face was twisted into something resembling a smile, though its mouth was too wide, its teeth too sharp, glistening in the dim light. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face, leaves crunched beneath my feet, and my breath came in short, panicked gasps. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just needed to get out of those woods, away from that thing. Behind me, I could hear it moving, its footsteps slow and deliberate, like it knew I couldn't escape. The crying started again, but now it was different, distorted, echoing, almost mocking. It was closer, always closer, no matter how fast I ran. My flashlight flickered again, and this time it went out completely. I stumbled, falling to my knees, my hands scraping against the rough ground. I fumbled with the flashlight, but it was dead. I was alone in the dark. And then I heard it, that voice, right behind me. "Don't leave," it whispered, so close I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. I screamed, scrambling to my feet, and running blindly through the trees, branches tearing at my clothes, my skin. I didn't care where I was going, just away. I burst through the trees, my legs burning, my lungs on fire, and I saw it. The edge of the woods. My house was just ahead, the porch light a beacon in the darkness. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I was inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, my mind racing with what I had seen, what I had heard. To this day, I still don't know if what I experienced was real or just a dream. But one thing is for sure, I'm never going back into the woods again.